My grandmother always said our family had two kinds of people, the ones who build things and the ones who burn them down. I never understood what she meant until the night my brother stood in our grandfather's living room and called me a thief. I was 17. My grandfather had raised us. Not officially, our parents were alive, technically, but he was the one who showed up. He drove me to swim practice at 5 in the morning. He sat in the front row at every school play even when I only had 2 lines. He kept a jar of peanut butter cookies on the counter because he knew I'd come over after school just to have something to come home to. He was the kind of man who didn't say "I love you" often, but you felt it in everything he did. My brother was 3 years older than me. He had our mother's charm and our father's ability to disappear right when things got hard. Everyone in the family thought he was something special. He told jokes at the right moment. He remembered birthdays. He knew how to make adults feel smart and appreciated, which is a skill I didn't understand until much later. That it is a skill, a deliberate one, and some people use it like a weapon. I was the quiet one, the one with her nose in a book, the one who said the wrong thing at the wrong time because she hadn't yet learned that honesty and timing are two completely different things. My grandfather loved me anyway, maybe more for it. The summer before my senior year, my grandfather set up what he called the education account. He'd been saving for years, $40,000 split between me and my brother, 20 each, to be used for college. He sat us both down at his kitchen table, the same table where I'd done homework for a decade, and he explained the terms simply: use it for school, and it's yours. Spend it on anything else, and it goes to charity. No arguments, no exceptions. My brother smiled and said, "Of course, Grandpa. Thank you." I remember thinking he agreed too quickly, but I didn't say anything. 3 weeks later, $2,000 went missing from my grandfather's bedside lockbox. My grandfather kept cash there for emergencies, had since before ATMs were everywhere. Old habit, a few $100s usually, but he'd been to the bank that week and hadn't made it to the credit union to deposit the extra. My aunt had visited. I had visited. My brother had stopped by to help fix a leaky faucet, or so he said. My grandfather noticed on a Tuesday. He didn't accuse anyone immediately. He mentioned it quietly to my aunt, who mentioned it to my mother, who called my father, and by Thursday evening it had become a family phone tree, and somehow, by Friday morning, my name was at the center of it. I found out the way you find out most terrible things, second-hand, in pieces, when it was already too late to stop. My aunt called me. She didn't ask. She stated, "Your grandfather is missing money, and you were the last one in the house." I hadn't been the last one in the house. My brother had been there 2 days after me, but I didn't know that then. I said I hadn't taken anything. She said she'd like to believe me. The way she said it made very clear that she did not. By Saturday, my grandfather called me to come over. I drove there with my hands shaking on the wheel, which didn't make sense to me at the time. I hadn't done anything wrong, so why was I scared? I understand now. You can know you're innocent and still be terrified of what people decide to believe. Those are two different things. He was sitting in his armchair when I walked in. My brother was already there, which I hadn't expected. He was leaning against the bookshelf with his arms crossed and an expression I can only describe as practiced sadness, like he'd rehearsed it. My grandfather looked at me the way he never had before, uncertain. He said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." I said, "I would never lie to you." My brother said, very quietly, like he didn't want to say it but had to, "She's borrowed money from friends before and never paid it back." I didn't want to say anything, but I turned and looked at him. He looked back at me with that same expression. Sorrowful. Reluctant. I said, "That's not true." He shrugged, like he wished it weren't. My grandfather rubbed his face. He looked tired. He said he wasn't going to make any accusations. He said he wanted everyone to take some time and think. He said if someone made a mistake, now was the time to come forward. I went home and sat in my car in my driveway for 40 minutes. I called my best friend. I told her what happened. She said, "He didn't actually accuse you." I said I knew. She said, "So maybe it'll be fine." I said I knew that too, but I also knew what my brother had said, and I knew how rooms work. How one quiet sentence lands differently than a shouted accusation, how it burrows in and stays there while the loud thing fades. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. My grandfather was polite to me. That was the worst part. He'd always been warm, always greeted me with a hug, and immediately asked about school or whatever book I was reading. Now he was courteous. He offered me a seat and asked general questions and looked slightly past my shoulder when I answered. My aunt stopped calling. My mother tiptoed around the subject. My brother came to Sunday dinner and told a story about helping a stranger change a tire on the highway, and everyone laughed, and I sat there with my fork in my hand wondering if I was losing my mind. No one said I did it. No one said I did it. No one said I did it. The silence was the verdict. I went back to school in September. I told myself it would pass. I focused on my applications. I wanted to study social work, which looking back is almost funny, given what was happening at home. I wanted to help people navigate broken systems. I was living in Sidewine and couldn't see the door. My grandfather did not revoke my portion of the education account, but he didn't bring it up either. We existed in this strange suspension, and I didn't know if it would ever break. It broke in November at Thanksgiving. My grandfather had started using a laptop. My cousin had set him up with one the previous Christmas. Nothing fancy, just something so he could video call us and look things up without asking for help every time. He was proud of learning it. He watched YouTube videos about woodworking and looked up baseball statistics and occasionally emailed my aunt lengthy messages that she would screenshot and send to the family group chat with affectionate mockery. He'd also started using the security camera app. The house had cameras. He'd had them installed 2 years before, 2 outside, 1 in the front hallway, 1 covering the living room and the edge of the kitchen. He put them up after a neighbor's car was broken into. He mostly forgot they existed. My cousin had shown him how to pull up the footage on his laptop. He'd done it once when he thought someone was messing with his bird feeder and wanted evidence. Then he forgot about it again. Thanksgiving was at his house, the way it always was. 12 people, 2 tables. The folding one dragged out of the garage. For the kids, even though the kids were all teenagers now and none of us fit the kid chairs anymore. My grandfather made his turkey with the orange glaze. My aunt brought green bean casserole. My brother brought a bottle of wine he introduced by name like it meant something. We ate. It was fine. The suspension held. After dinner, people spread out the way they do. Some in the living room, some in the kitchen cleaning up. My grandfather was showing my cousin something on his laptop at the dining room table. I could hear them talking about how to make the screen text larger. My brother was in the kitchen with my aunt, drying dishes and telling her something that was making her laugh. I was sitting near the window, half reading a message on my phone, when I heard my grandfather say, "Wait, go back." His voice had changed. Just slightly. Enough. I looked up. He was leaning close to the laptop. My cousin had gone still. Neither of them was talking anymore. My grandfather said slowly, "What date was that?" My cousin said the date out loud. It was the week the money had gone missing. My grandfather didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Can you make it bigger?" My cousin made it bigger. And then my grandfather did something that I had never seen him do in 17 years of knowing him. He put his hand over his mouth and he closed his eyes. My cousin looked up and found my face across the room. I set down my phone. My grandfather asked my cousin to connect the laptop to the TV. My cousin looked uncertain, but he did it. He pulled the cord from behind the entertainment center, plugged it in, and the laptop screen appeared on the 60-inch television my grandfather had gotten last Christmas that he mostly used for football. By this point, the kitchen had gone quiet. My aunt had stopped laughing. My brother had set down his dish towel. The footage was not dramatic. Security camera footage never is. It was gray and slightly grainy and time-stamped in yellow in the corner. It showed the hallway. It showed the door to the bedroom. It showed my brother walking in. It showed my brother walking out 11 minutes later with something in his hand that he put in his jacket pocket. It showed the date and time with perfect indifference. The room was absolutely silent. My brother said, "That could be anything." My grandfather looked at him. He didn't say anything for a long time. My grandfather was not a man who raised his voice. He had a specific way of going quiet that was worse than any yelling I'd ever heard from anyone. He said, "I'd like you to leave my house." My brother said, "Grandpa, let me explain." My grandfather said, "I'd like you to leave my house right now." My brother looked around the room. at my aunt, at my mother, at me. He was looking for the thing that had always been there, the benefit of the doubt, the willingness to hear him out, the practiced sadness that made people pause. No one moved. He left. After he was gone, the room stayed quiet for a while. Then my grandfather got up slowly, walked around the table, and stood in front of me. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said quietly so only I could hear, "I am so sorry I doubted you. I didn't trust myself to speak." I nodded. He said, "That was wrong of me. You deserved better than that." I said, "I know you didn't want to believe it." He said, "That's not an excuse." He was right. It wasn't. But it was the most honest thing anyone in my family had said in months, and it was enough. The weeks after that were complicated in the way that consequences usually are. Not clean, not satisfying in the way you imagine when you're in the middle of something terrible and you fantasize about the moment it gets set right. My grandfather called an attorney, not a family friend, not someone my aunt recommended, his own attorney, the one who had handled his affairs for 20 years. They reviewed the education account documentation and made changes. My brother's $20,000 was formally redirected to a scholarship fund at the community college 2 towns over, which was, in a strange way, more fitting than anything I could have come up with myself. My grandfather also pressed charges. My mother begged him not to. My aunt cried on the phone for an hour and a half. He listened to all of it and then said, simply, that he loved his grandson, but that he had taught his grandchildren the difference between right and wrong, and that he could not in good conscience teach anyone that stealing from an old man was something you simply move past. My brother was charged with petty theft. Given his clean record, he did not go to prison. He did mandatory community service and paid restitution, the $2,000 plus interest, which my grandfather donated entirely to the local food bank. My mother didn't speak to my grandfather for a month. Then she did, because he was her father, and eventually everything shifted back towards something that resembled normal, the way it does, the way it always does, even when part of you thinks it shouldn't. My brother called me once, in January. I let it go to voicemail. He said he was sorry. He said he had been in a bad place. He said he hoped I could understand. His voice was smooth and practiced, and I thought about that expression, the practiced sadness, and I deleted the message. I understand now that people who have spent their whole lives performing emotion are not the same as people who feel it. That is not a judgment. It is just a fact I had to learn. I got into school, state university, social work program, full financial aid, plus my grandfather's $20,000 sitting in an account with my name on it. My grandfather came to my graduation from high school in June. He sat in the third row and clapped until his hands were red. Afterward, he took me to his favorite diner and ordered the same thing he always ordered: coffee, eggs over easy, wheat toast, and asked me what I was most looking forward to about college. I said I didn't know yet. I said I thought I wanted to figure out how families work, why some of them hold together and some of them don't. He looked at me over his coffee cup and smiled in a way he didn't do often. He said, "You always were the smart one." I said, "You never told me that." He said, "I'm telling you now. I have thought about that night a lot since then." The security footage, gray and indifferent, playing on the Christmas TV while my family stood in silence. My grandfather's hand on my shoulder afterward. The quiet apology. I used to wish I had done something differently, that I had spoken up louder, pushed back harder, demanded that someone believe me from the start. But I was 17 and I hadn't learned yet that being right is not the same as being believed, and that sometimes all you can do is stay steady and let the truth do its own work. The truth did its work. That's the part I hold on to. Not the anger, not the months of silence, not my brother's voicemail. The footage played. The room went quiet. My grandfather stood up and walked across the room and said he was sorry. Some things don't get said in our family. Some things you have to wait a long time for. I waited. It was worth it. I'm still waiting, in some ways, for my mother to say more than she has, for my brother to mean it when he apologizes, for my aunt to acknowledge what the silence cost me. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. But I'm in my junior year now. I have an internship at a family services nonprofit. I have a small apartment with good light and a peanut butter cookie recipe I learned from my grandfather's handwritten index card, the one he gave me when I moved out. He still calls every Sunday. He still asks about whatever book I'm reading. Some things hold together. I've learned to pay attention to which ones. I've thought a lot about what made that Thanksgiving night feel so different from every other hard moment in my life. It wasn't the footage itself. It wasn't watching my brother leave without a word. It was my grandfather walking across the room and saying, "I'm sorry," before I asked him to. That was the thing I didn't expect. And I've spent a lot of time since then trying to understand why it hit me the way it did. I think it's because an apology you have to demand isn't really an apology. It's a transaction. What my grandfather gave me that night was something else. It was him choosing honesty over comfort, choosing me over the easier version of the story where everyone was just a little bit wrong and no one had to be accountable. He didn't have to say it. He could have let the footage speak and moved on. He chose not to. That's what I mean when I talk about character. Not the dramatic version, not standing up in a room and making a speech. The real version is quieter. It's an old man getting up from his chair and walking across a room and saying 4 words he didn't have to say. My brother made choices too. I don't think he was born the way he turned out. I think he learned, somewhere along the way, that charm was easier than honesty and that other people's trust was something you could borrow without paying back. And maybe no one ever showed him that those debts come due. They always do. Not as punishment. That's not how it works. It's simpler than that. The people who love you start to see you clearly, and then you have to live with what they see. What I learned from all of it, the months of silence, my grandfather's uncertain eyes, my brother's practiced expression, is that staying quiet when you're wrongly accused is one of the hardest things a person can do. Every instinct says fight back, say it louder, make them hear you. But I was 17 and I didn't have the proof, and even if I had, I'm not sure anyone was ready to receive it. The truth needed time to surface on its own. That required me to hold on and not collapse in the meantime. That's the part no one tells you about being wrongly accused. That the real test isn't whether you can prove your innocence. It's whether you can keep going while you wait. I kept going. I applied to school. I showed up to Sunday dinners. I did not let what my brother did turn me into someone bitter or small. That was a choice I made every single day for months, and it was exhausting, and I would make it again. My grandfather called last Sunday. He asked about my internship. He asked if I was eating enough. He told me a story about a woodpecker that had been attacking his fence post for 3 days straight, and I laughed until my eyes watered. I told him I loved him. He said, "I know, me too, kid. Some things hold. You just have to be the kind of person who holds with them."